In the previous movie, we created both an axonometric view and a perspective view. In this movie, I'm going to take the axonometric view and I'm going to dig a little deeper into its settings on the Properties palette. So I have here a view called 3D View Settings, open on screen if you're following along in the exercise files. And the active view is the default 3D view, or what I like to refer to as curly bracket 3D. That's just my little personal name for it, but that's because over here on the project browser, as we talked about, it has the curly brackets around the name 3D, and that is the default 3D view name. Now over here on the Properties palette, we have a lot of the standard properties that you would expect, things like view scale and level of detail and so on. And for our purposes here, what I'm more interested in is the settings down here under Extents. Now, there are several checkboxes in this area, some of which have controls in other areas. So these first two, Crop View and Crop Region Visible, correspond to these two icons down here on the View control bar, Crop View and Show Crop Region. So if you were to click on either of these icons here, they're both like toggle switches. So for example, if I click Crop the View or Show Crop Region, which really, the crop region is way out here. It's this big rectangle, so showing it usually is the first thing you want to do. Notice that down here, both of those boxes are now checked. If I were to uncheck, it's the same as toggling both of those switches, and I don't know if you could tell, but the two icons changed. So you see the little red X comes and goes when I check this one and uncheck it. And you can see the little light bulb either turns blue or yellow when I check and uncheck that. So it's subtle, but those two are the same setting. Now if I turn on the crop region, think of this as a picture frame. This crop region functions the same way as crop regions in plans, sections, or elevations. It's limiting what you see when you drag this view to a sheet, for example, or print it out. Now using these little grips on the sides, I can actually reduce the extent of this crop region down a little bit, like so. And of course, it doesn't look like it's doing anything. And that's simply because at the moment, I have the crop region disabled. This box is unchecked. So if I check that box or click the icon down here, then suddenly the picture frame activates and anything that falls outside the picture frame is being cropped out of the view. And if I zoom in here, I now have a closer cropped view of my drawing. If I do ZF, zoom to fit, it will now zoom the screen relative to that picture frame rather than to some arbitrary size out in space there. It also actually starts to tell you why when you do zoom to fit in a 3D view that it sometimes is zooming really far away. Even if the crop region is turned off, it's still zooming to the edge of that crop region as a rule. So if the crop region is set really huge and invisible, then that's what it's zooming to, and it may seem a little arbitrary. So that's the crop region. And again, think of that as a two-dimensional picture frame. The easiest way to illustrate that that's a picture frame is if I hold down my Shift key and I drag the wheel, you actually see that I can orbit the 3D view within the picture frame. It's going a little wild here right now. Let me show you a trick. If you select anything in the model before you start to orbit, you get a lot more control because that becomes the center of the rotation. So if you want to actually fine-tune the angle and the orientation of this 3D view, that's really the best way to do it. Now, one other tip. If I'm happy with this orientation, what I really want to do over here is rename this view. So I'm going to right-click on it and choose Rename, and I'm going to call this 3D of Entrance. And the reason that I want to do that is it will remember now this orientation I created. Otherwise, when I close the project and reopen it, the default 3D view always resets itself back to that southwest orientation, which can be a little bit frustrating if you've spent a lot of time reorienting the view and expect it to stay that way. Now, let me zoom out a little bit and let's look at one other setting. And that is I'm going to disable the crop for a moment so we can see the whole model. And this other setting is the section box. Now the section box is like a 3D crop. So if you think of the crop region as a two-dimensional crop, like a picture frame, this is actually a 3D crop. Now it looks like I got to zoom out even farther because here's the box way out here. So you get this 3D section box now that surrounds the entire building, and it's got its little grips here. And using these, you're actually going to be cropping the 3D model. And if I zoom in here, you can see that I'm actually cutting through the ground plane when I do that. So I'm seeing brown earth there when I start to cut it. And I can adjust the size of this box, pull it in closer to the building. This gives me another kind of visual effect. It looks more like an actual chipboard and foam core study model now sitting on a base, like the traditional models that we would have created, traditional physical models. So that's another option. You've got a little grip here on the corner that will allow you to rotate the box. So if I drag that, unfortunately it's not very visual, so you have to kind of let go before you see the rotation occur. So it might take a few trials before you get that correct. You can even drag it vertically, and I could start to crop out part of the building if I wanted to. Hold down my shift key and drag the wheel, and perhaps I want to start peering into the model. So the crop region is that 2D picture frame. This is the section box. Now here I'm showing you the manual way to set up the section box. In a future movie, I'm going to show you an alternative approach to creating the section box, which you might prefer, but you'll have both methods at your disposal to choose from. Last thing to point out is if you don't want the section box visible here, you can actually hide it. So you just simply select it, go to the light bulb, choose Hide Elements, it disappears. Later, if you need to get it back so that you can make adjustments to it, you can just use the Reveal Hidden Elements and it will come back. You'll see it here in red. You can make adjustments to the height of the box or the shape of the box and then just toggle off the reveal mode and it will re-enable it. So those are some of the key extents features of the default 3D view that you want to be aware of, the crop region, the section box, and it helps you fine-tune the extent of what you're seeing in that 3D view.